Okay, good morning. I think it's time to restart. Good morning from Barcelona. I am Pastora Martínez Samper, Vice President for Globalization and Cooperation at the Open University of Catalonia, and part of the organizing committee of this seminar. So thank you very much for your attendance, and thank you for resisting with more than 180 participants right now. So let's start with the next session and the panel. But let me just say that when we decided to organize a second edition of this CRUE seminar, we decided to devote it to research assessment because, as already mentioned, it is a key element for a cultural change in academia, and this cultural change, that's what open science is all about. And a cultural change that will allow us to perform and share our research in a different way, more trustworthy, more fair, more efficient, more sustainable way. We wanted to foster this debate at a Portuguese and Spanish level, having an overview of what was happening in Europe. We already listened to the rector of Maastricht University inspiring us with the example of the Dutch academic system. And thank you very much, Rector, for revealing us the secret of the Dutch approach. Hopefully we can take some ideas to implement them in our countries. And now we have two speakers that will give us two different approaches of the movements that are been happening till now in Europe. On one hand, we have Dr. Bregt Saenen. He is part of the Research and Innovation Unit at the European University Association, where his main responsibilities are the digital and open science transitions in European research, including a focus on academic career assessment. Bregt is here to give us an overview of what's going on in European universities concerning research assessment. And this work has been done in the framework of the EUA's expert group on open science, where for the last 2 years, the EUA has shown its commitment to raise awareness on research assessment and also to support universities by providing information and opening the discussion concerning this particular topic. So here, let me take this opportunity to thank the EUA and Bregt in particular for the support in the organization of this workshop. And on the other hand, we have Cecilia Cabello. Cecilia is the Director of Open Science and Internationalization at the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology, the FECIT. And at FECIT, her main responsibilities are in the areas of R&I indicators, policy monitoring, scientific information and infrastructure, researchers' career development, science advice and diplomacy, and support in the internationalization of a Spanish R&I system. But here we also invite Cecilia to participate in that panel because she currently is chair of the ERAC Standing Working Group for Human Resources and Mobility. This ERAC, the European Research Area and Innovation Committee, is the EU's Strategic Policy Advisory Committee. So it's also important to have her point of view of what's going on in Europe. So we are going to start with their presentations, and then we will have a question and answer at the end of the session. So for the public, please use the question and answer screen at the bottom right of your screen to ask questions for both the speakers, and I will try to do my best to pick them up and ask to them at the end of both interventions. So that said, Bregt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pastora. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm saying hello from a very cloudy Brussels today, and it's been mentioned before, it's very unfortunate we have to do this virtually. But I do want to thank both CRUP and CRUE for taking this initiative and making this go forward, even virtually. The topic on this discussion is there's a real momentum behind the discussion on academic career assessment. So to have this here now, even virtually, is, I think, fantastic. As soon as Pastora and Eloy reached out to us at EUA to become involved here, we immediately said yes. And hoping that now with my presentation, I'm just going to start sharing my screen, that we can maybe inform the discussion a little bit more with the data that we've gathered. You have, if this all works, yes. You've already heard that I work for the European University Association, and that in the past couple of years, we've had a real focus on academic career assessment in the transition to open science. And who are we? We're a representative organization of universities and national rectors conferences. We have members across 48 European countries. And what we do is, on the one hand, we provide an independent voice for European universities as a collective. So wherever a decision is made at EU level, at national level, we try and bring in the voice of universities. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, and that's what I'm doing today, we also try and provide an expertise. We research topics we believe are of interest to all universities across Europe. And we then try and sort of provide that information to have a knowledge base for discussions like these. Now, why academic career assessment in particular? It's really coming from us seeing that higher education, research, innovation, this is a landscape that is changing, and is changing fast across Europe. And the way that we review research and review research careers, as Rian Letchert already said, has to keep up with that. We need to review this constantly to make sure that we're incentivizing and rewarding the right things. You see a couple of examples here in terms of open science, open access, in having perhaps more acknowledgement for what is being done in terms of learning and teaching, and just in general promote a much broader range of academic activities. We incentivize and reward not enough activities right now, we believe. We need to do better there. And also you see there that we believe at the EUA this is a shared responsibility that will need a concerted approach. Now, in this presentation, which I'll keep fairly brief, I just want to highlight 3 things from a survey that we did last year. I want to give you 3 snapshots that I believe are important for the discussion today. The survey we did last year, really the intention was to have a very comprehensive, up-to-date overview of how academic career assessment is performed right now across Europe. And again, we want that information to inform the discussion on how to then change and hopefully improve the way that is done. We are very happy with the participation. We had 260 individual universities that gave us a valid response across 32 European countries. With that introduction out of the way, just 3 snapshots, 3, I think, key elements from the survey report that is available online, where I can think that that's really something to keep in mind during the discussion. The first snapshot is what you'll see here is the autonomy to develop and implement research assessment approaches. We asked universities, how autonomous do you feel in defining how you approach academic career assessment for different purposes? And you almost immediately see on this slide that universities by and large feel either highly or mostly autonomous. They are telling us we have a real agency. We define our own approach. We feel quite autonomous. That's great. That shows that universities are a real actor in this discussion, that they feel that they have a say in this, they have an agency here. But I should also point out that this is not the entire story. Behind this slide is also the story of a couple of other questions that we asked universities. We asked universities, if you feel autonomous at any level, could you elaborate what that means to you? And then we got a really nuanced answer from many universities. Universities told us, well, we feel autonomous in defining our own approach, but we obviously need to keep in mind our governments, rules and regulations coming from the government. we need to keep in mind what research funding organizations in our region or in our country, what they are doing. And also in general, a lot of universities said beyond just governments and research funders, universities also telling us that, well, we work in a very competitive environment. University rankings, for example, were mentioned very often. We work in a competitive environment. We also need to keep in mind, if we change our approach to assessment, how does that impact our ability to get funding, our ability to, well, score on the rankings. So there's a very competitive environment as well that they take into account. So then to come back to this first snapshot, this first slide, what you see here is that universities feel autonomous, they have an agency, but you have to qualify that by also pointing out that it's an autonomy to react to a variety of external pressures coming from the government, research funders, or just a competitive environment in general. That's my first snapshot. On to the second one. The second point of data that I think is really interesting for the discussion here today is when we asked universities, what do you feel is important as an academic activity for your assessment of research careers? Which types of activities do you look most at? Now, this is a big slide, but it breaks down into two parts, really. The green, anything in green is universities telling us this is either very important or important to us. This activity is important in some way. And the blue is universities saying this is rather unimportant or of very little importance to us. And if you then start looking at it in a bit more detail, you quickly see at the top there, what is the most important activity? It's publishing research. This is not a surprise. Publishing research, virtually every university told us this is a real part of our assessment approach. This is something important that we look at. How much and where are researchers publishing? Attracting external research funding is also very important at the top, and research impact, knowledge transfer rounds off the top three. These are very important activities. But if you then keep looking at this slide, what I think is very interesting to point out is that this slide has a lot of green in it. A lot of activities are important in some way. If you look at all the other activities, you'll see that there is a long list of activities that at least 50% of universities will say this is either very important or important. Teaching activities, research collaboration, either within academia or with partners outside of academia, supervision, research networking, all of these are activities that a lot of universities indicate this is important to us. So it's not just about publications, it's not just about attracting external research funding. There is a whole basket of activities that is taken into account. There's one more thing, since this seminar also focused on the transition to open science, I do want to point out, if you look at the last activity in this slide, open science and open access, unfortunately, you do see that the blue jumps up there. Suddenly you have many more universities indicating to us, in terms of assessing research careers, this is not as important to us. This is rather unimportant or of little importance. I want to be clear here and say that this doesn't mean that open science and open access are not important to these universities. It tells us that these activities are not part of their assessment approach. That's very different. We know from previous surveys that open access to publications, for example, 60% of universities in Europe have a policy on open access for publications. So it is important to the universities. But here you see that that hasn't made the jump yet to the assessment approaches. I think that is something to keep in mind if we're talking about, do we actually reward what we want to reward? Now, that was my second snapshot. What type of activities do universities think are most important within their assessment approach? And following up on that, we then asked, and this is my third snapshot, how do you then evaluate those activities? And that's the slide you see here. Again, the green is anything important or very important. The blue is unimportant or of little importance. And there you see, I think, more of a stark difference between what's important and what is unimportant. You see that publication metrics at the top there, peer review assessment, these are things that are very important to the universities. These are the tools that they use to assess research careers. If you go to the bottom there, you see altometrics, other types of metrics. You see that these become very quickly very unimportant to the universities. Universities in their approaches are really focused on publication metrics, it seems, and on peer review assessment. One reason that I point this out, this snapshot in particular, is again from the answers of the universities. We see that it's not so much that there is no willingness to evolve beyond publication metrics, that there's no willingness to broaden the types of tools that they use. It's rather, I feel from the answers, a sense of uncertainty as to what that would be exactly. Metrics measuring collaborations or open science and open access indicators, old metrics, all of these are things where we feel that universities are telling us, well, we're not quite sure how to proceed with this, how to incorporate different types of tools within our assessment procedure and still be able to rely on them. So there's definitely some work to be done there to make sure that if we want to incentivize and reward a broader array of academic activities, that also the tools are available. And this is where good practices at university level, at regional, national level come in. For example, we've had the example of the Netherlands, but there's also quite a few universities that are exploring and experimenting. These are practices we want to be looking at in terms of what works and what can be improved. Now, I just want to give you one more slide that is a follow-up to this one. We asked what type of tools do you use? And because publication metrics was so important to every university, we followed that up. Every university indicating this is in any way important, publication metrics, we asked, could you put a name to that? What type of publication metrics do you then actually use? And we got this result. Asking universities what type of publication metrics you use, you get that the journal impact factor followed by the H-index, they are the most important publication metrics that are virtually everywhere used. I just want to give that slide because this indicates a real problem. The journal impact factor, I think most of us know, is not something that is accurate in any way if you evaluate on the individual level, because keep in mind, this is specifically for research careers. Universities telling us we use this for research careers. This is an issue. The 75% of universities using the journal impact factor to evaluate the work of individuals. So again, there is a lot of work to be done here in terms of moving beyond this, but also then giving universities the tools that they need to actually be able to move beyond this. For the record, I have here the main conclusions of the survey report. I'm just going to leave them up here for a minute for you to go through them, but these are all part of the report. Essentially what we're saying is expand the range of activities, incentivize and reward more activities, and do that with more tools. And also, as I said in my first snapshot, this is something where universities have a big role to play, but it's also up for other actors to work with the universities. So that being said, thank you, Pastora. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Bregt. And now, Cecilia, the floor is yours, whenever you want. We cannot hear you, Cecilia. You're muted.
Sorry.
Now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you.
Pastora. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my video just because I'm not sure how my connection will work. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm trying to get it on the full screen and I cannot seem to do this. Okay, perfect. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And I would just like to thank Pastora for the invitation, and also for CRUE and CRUP for the invitation to participate in this very interesting seminar. I think it's a great pleasure to be here, and I congratulate you for organizing this seminar, and because I think the issues of open science and its relation to career assessment is very, very important. We already heard from the keynote speaker how the Dutch experience in the room of the balance between recognition and awards is important, and also from the EUA on what they've been doing with the survey. I think it's very, very interesting. I'd just like to say what we're doing, like Pastora introduced, as I'm the chair of the EDAC Standing Working Group for Human Resources and Mobility, and I want to give a little bit about the work we're doing in this group. So the Standing Working Group for Human Resources and Mobility is a structure or a group that its main goal is to monitor the progress of the European research and innovation area for priority 3, which is open labor market for researchers, to ensure the removal of barriers of research mobility, training, and to ensure that research careers are attractive. Okay, so this is very important. So this is what our main goal and mission is to do. The group has representatives. The representatives, we gather on 3 or 4 times a year to provide information and to share on the overall plans and strategies that we devise at national level, because they're representatives from the countries in the areas of the EDA framework, and we report on what is going on with respect to researchers' careers, research mobility, research assessment, research training, et cetera, et cetera. So like I said, the delegates are member states and associated countries, and they represent their countries. They're not considered individual experts, so they're considered as country representatives. And the whole idea is to ensure an appropriate coordination among the national representatives. The reason why I'm explaining this is you have to understand that the Standing Working Group is under the Secretariat of the European Council. So it's under the remit of the EDAC, which is the Research and Innovation Committee of the Council of the European Council, and the European Commission, which most of us are more familiar with, obviously, is a member of the group. It supports the group. So we're a member state group, and this is important to understand. And before it, I mean, this group has only been part of the council since 2017. Before it was an expert group that was an advisory board to the European Commission. So some of our historical work of this group is more related to what we did as commission, but obviously it's a continuation, because the idea is that the member states should monitor EDA and to ensure the progress of EDA, and in particularly for priority 3. So what do? Well, we monitor the implementation activities and initiatives that occur with respect to the priority 3. We try to strengthen mutual learning activities and share best practices and use peer review mechanisms to learn about what we're doing at national levels in the different competencies of the group. We define, if appropriate, indicators to monitor the progress. Basically, the group was the one responsible for defining the indicators for priority 3. We develop guidelines to reinforce consistent implementation of the common interests that we have with respect to careers, researchers' careers, and mobility. And we liaison with relevant groups and stakeholders to make better use of these initiatives. So obviously, we work really closely with the EURAXIS activities and the bridgehead organizations, and with other groups like EUA, with the Marie Curie Alumni Association, and other groups. So to talk a little bit about our past work, in 2005, the group developed the European Charter for Researchers and Code of Conduct for Recruitment. So this is something I'll talk about a little bit later. We developed the European Framework for Researchers, which is basically the denomination of R1, R2, R3, and R4, which I think many of you are familiar with. We also developed the guidelines for innovative doctoral training principles. The group is responsible for the open, transparent, and merit-based recruitment toolkit, which also was implemented in the logo of the Human Resources Strategy for Researchers. And also, I would like, because of the context of the seminar, talk about this report because we did, in 2017, we did 2 reports. One had to do with education and one had education and skills, and the other had to do with rewards and assessment with regards to researchers training and in the context of open sciences practices. So the idea here is the report developed on a career assessment matrix for open science because the idea that we wanted to develop was exactly how to integrate the criteria for open science in the different evaluation mechanisms. And here we thought that it's not a matter of adding on criteria for open science, but integrating in everything that has been done with the research, how researchers evaluated and how they carry out their research, how they're doing their teaching, how they're supervising doctoral thesis, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a way to develop a matrix. And since 2017, I'm aware that many countries have tried to implement this, at least at institutional level. So with respect to considerations I wanted to say is that in order for open science practice to become mainstream and to be really embedded in the evaluation of researchers for R1 to R4, we think that there's a need to, like my predecessor said in his presentation, that there needs to be a different approach in how evaluation is carried out for recruitment and for promotion. Also, this is not only for the universities and the research centers, but also within the funding agencies. They have to reform their methods of how they're awarding grants. We think another key factor is the senior researchers. And senior researchers, they're the ones that perform many of the assessment mechanisms. And I think the way they approach evaluation also they have to be convinced of the open science practices. So overall, what we think is there's a cultural change that is needed, and that organizations and research community have to work together to promote and ask for engagement in open science. So it's a shared responsibility to get the European perspective. Other works that we've done, which I think is related to the talk today, is the fact that, as you're aware, the European Commission has 2 policy mechanisms. One is the ERA, which is the European Research and Innovation area, and the other is the European Higher Education area, which is governed by the DG EAC, which is the education part of the European Commission. So one of the things that we did in our group more recently was last year is try to relate these policy mechanisms and see where there's synergies and where we can work together. I think it's important that we talk about this because in general, academics and researchers are in the universities in the same institutions. And so we think that it's important that we support, beyond 2020, when the new framework for EDA will be coming out, there has to be better support with respect to academics, higher education, and research institutions. We have to achieve effective mobility of students, research academics, and professionals in general within and to and from Europe. We have to create a common human resources standards. And here's what we're talking about in this context of the seminar is recognition and rewards for what we're doing as researchers and academics. So the document, it's available, and I can provide you with the link. It's about what are the challenges with these 2 synergies and how we can facilitate better linkages between the 2. And so we go into detail about how we can support the social response of students, researchers, and academics. We talk about instruments and tools for effective mobility of researchers and academics, the common standards, like I say, and also in a more general area, inclusiveness in higher education and in research. Now, what is the group doing now? We currently just started in 2020 a new joint task force, which is called the Triangle Task Force. Why we call it Triangle Task Force? It's because there's other standing working groups under the remit of EDAC, which is OSI, the Open Science and Open Innovation Standing Working Group, and GD, which is the Gender for Research and Innovation Working Group. And we decided to do this joint task force because we think that there's 2 goals that need to be achieved, and it's very current and very relevant in the debate that we're talking about today, is to provide recommendations on training, incentives, and evaluation of research with an open science and open innovation and gender perspective. And also, we have in this task force, we have another goal is to review the charter and code with an open science, an open innovation perspective, a gender perspective, and also including the human resources perspective, which was quite obvious, but in this context, the academic perspective, and how we can provide some recommendations in updating the charter and code. Why do I talk about updating the charter and code? Like I said, it was developed in 2005, so it's 15 years old. Although it's 15 years old, it's important to remember that it's a set of principles and requirements which specifies the roles, responsibilities, entailments of the researchers and their employers and the relation between them, the researchers, the employers, and the funders. Here's the, you probably cannot really see the details, but these are the principles divided on what are the responsibilities of the researchers and how the charter provides guidelines on how to enhance the professional development of researchers, and it constitutes a framework for this relationship between them, and what are the responsibilities and what are the rights of the researchers. The European Charter and Code also talk about recruitment. In recruitment, we're talking about promotion, we're talking about assessment, we're talking about evaluation. So it also addresses these principles and requirements in the perspective of the employers, which would be universities or research institutions, or the funders when they appoint or they recruit or they promote researchers. So this set of 40 principles that I show here, well, the idea of the Joint Task Force is to basically revisit what is said by these principles, that we have many, many institutions that already adhere to the Charter and Code, review it and see if we need to update it, revise it, and modernize it in the context of the gender issues, academic issues, and the open science issues. So as a concluding remark or final slide, I think that there's a lot of policy areas for action with respect to open science and career assessment. Basically, we have to continue work in fostering and creative incentives for open science, which I think open science has to be embedded in all the activities of research and not considered something different. We have to remove the barriers, obviously, to open science and everything that entails. Mainstreaming it into promoting policies with respect to open science. And I'm aware that Portugal has an open science national plan, and Spain currently has a commission on open science to work towards a plan. We have to talk about also not just the open science practices, but developing research infrastructures to support open science, and in general, embed open science in society as a socioeconomic driver. And that's what I wanted to contribute today. So this is what we're doing in our group, and we try to contribute to the debate, and we hope that we can also learn from the experiences, and participating in these type of seminars for us is very important, because we like to hear what are the worries, what are the concerns that the national governments and stakeholders are doing with respect to these areas. So thank you for your attention. Gracias y obrigado.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Thank you very much, Bregt.